What is the border and surveillance industry, and what does it have to do with climate? Let's discuss. The border and surveillance industry is the simplest term for a huge industry that incorporates the border, the military, detention, tech, and finance industries. If it sounds complex, that's because it is. The border and surveillance industry is busy at work every day promoting a web that spans right across the world. And I mean right across the world, on land and out at sea. It's here in Los Angeles, it's in Mongolia, it's in the Sahara Desert, everywhere. It's all around us, and it gets easier to see once you know where to look. Borders can often look obvious. Think about the walls and fences on the southern border here in the United States. Surveillance technology helps to expand these borders, and this is not always so obvious. Think about thermal imaging camera fleets of drones and biometric databases. That is a huge collection of fingerprints and iris scans, as well as AI and phone and social media tracking. This industry is already huge and predicted to grow faster and bigger than ever before. The largest expansion is set to be in biometrics and artificial intelligence, which is known as AI. Markets and market research reports forecast the biometric systems market to double from $33 billion in 2019 to $65.3 billion by 2024, of which biometrics for migration purposes will be a significant sector, and it says that the AI market will equal US $109.6 billion by 2025. In the United States alone, the detention and deportation machine is already huge. There are a few times and places we can trace its origin back to, one of them being in October 1994 when Operation Gatekeeper began to roll out across the southern border. Bill Clinton was the president, and CPB was known as INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service. They militarized the region with increased numbers of Border Patrol agents, new interior border checkpoints, more checks and detention borders, walls, and other infrastructure where there had been none, as well as installing technology like seismic sensors to detect people from crossing. After the 9/11 attacks, this was ramped up again. The Migration Policy Institute points out that following the 9/11 attacks, immigration policy was viewed principally through the lens of national security. This was not fair, but it happened, and this development gave rise to major new border security and law enforcement initiatives. There were heightened visa controls and screening of international travelers and would-be immigrants, as well as the collection and the storage of information in vast new databases used by law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and the use of state and local law enforcement as force multipliers in immigration enforcement. It's easy to forget sometimes that migration is not a crime and migrants are not criminals. They are just a convenient excuse to further militarize our borders. Here in the US, for years now, the border has steadily been fed money, resources, and staff. Meanwhile, detaining immigrants became a lucrative business when surging inmate populations in the 1980s led to a boom in for-profit prisons. Today, privately run prisons have become the government's default detention center for undocumented migrants. That is all just here in the US. Let's remember that the border and surveillance industry is a global one, and as an industry, it is booming. I want to take a beat here to point out that migration is often framed as a national security threat. This is inaccurate, and it's often because of xenophobia. Moving it is a direct adaptation strategy to global warming. People have always moved, and migration is a natural phenomenon observed in huge number of species, from butterflies to antelope to giant blue whales. Preventing people from migrating is dangerous, and it can even be deadly. We will discuss that shortly in future videos, but for now we know that the border and surveillance industry is set to make more money than the annual GDP of most countries. So perhaps we can understand why so many corporations, asset management firms, military companies, consultancy firms, and tech companies are hustling hard to get a slice of this pie to profit off of the trauma of immigrants. But what has this got to do with climate? And the answer is a lot. In 2003, Pentagon Commission report warned that the worst case climate scenario in the United States would need to erect the defensive fortresses to stop unwanted starving migrants from countries. And today, the Transnational Institute reports that the world's biggest emitters, which is the US, of greenhouse gases are spending on average 2.3 times as much on arming their borders as they are on climate finance. Countries like the United States, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, Canada, France, Australia are financing and building their fortresses a global climate wall to keep migrants out rather than facing the crisis that forces people to leave their homes in search of safety in the first place. Rich countries, the ones that emitted the most carbon and caused the most global warming, promised to provide climate finance that could help countries mitigate and adapt to climate change. At a United Nations Climate Summit in Copenhagen in 2009, rich nations promised to send the US $100 billion a year to less wealthy nations by 2020 to help them adapt to climate change and mitigate further rises in temperature. That promise was broken. They never delivered. Instead, they militarized their response to migration and expanded border and surveillance infrastructure. State Watch and the Transnational Institute provided a guide on the EU security, military, and border budgets for 2021-2027. They show a huge increase in funding, a total of 43.9 billion compared to 19.7 billion from 2014-2020. They will fuel a huge increase in military spending and further externalization of the EU's borders and underpin the expenses of the EU border agency Frontex. This provides booming profits for a border security industry, but unacceptable suffering for refugees and migrants who make increasingly dangerous and frequently deadly journeys to seek safety in a climate change world. When nations militarize their borders, that does not stop people from needing to move. It simply forces people to make the journeys and more dangerous journeys. This leads to the horror we saw in Texas in July this year, where 53 people were killed in a trailer truck, and the UNHCR reports that more than 3,000 people died or went missing while attempting to cross the Mediterranean and the Atlantic last year, hoping to reach Europe. Border militarization has intensified due to COVID-19, leading to increased troops and technology developed on many borders worldwide. There has been an increase in the violent pushbacks of all refugees on borders, as well as closure of ports, including to rescue vessels, that has led to increased deaths in already deadly regions such as the Mediterranean, which we already mentioned. And the travel bans that came down super quickly, remember that an abrupt closing of borders is almost always doing with no concern for the well-being of people on the move. We will continue to discuss the terrible impact this border part of the industry has on migrants. Later, I want to share with you how this industry targets and endangers people on the move. These are people like my own family, people like your own family. You know, we are all impacted somehow, even if we're not the ones moving right now, because surveillance is a massive part of it too. Surveillance technologies like drones, centralized biometric databases, and even facial recognition smartwatches are often tested out on vulnerable migrant populations before moving on to everybody else. Understanding surveillance is key in fighting for environmental justice. If you enjoyed watching this video, please be sure to watch the upcoming videos on the border and surveillance industry by giving me a like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you.